as an opposite of the statement that the law of non-contradiction is true and valid. So they're proving it by denying it, because they're making a claim about something that is the opposite of another claim, the claim that I would make. So that's why Aristotle said that this is a self-evident truth. You can't get around it, you can't get under it, you can't get over it. So that's the foundation here. And you may not think that has any relation at all to Christianity or talking about Christianity, but it has relation to any study, the pursuit of any truth. Let me rephrase that, and maybe you'll get it a little more better. I'm maybe not doing a great job here, to be honest. Let me make a statement. The law of non-contradiction is meaningless. That's what a pantheist would say. And there is no such thing as truth. Now, that's a loosely redefinition of what Friedrich Nietzsche said, the German philosopher. Now, when he says that there is no absolute truth, he's saying that as an absolutely true statement. Do you see a problem here? What's wrong with this picture? His view is true. He's saying that his view is true, not false. So in doing that, he has affirmed the very thing he's trying to defeat, the law of non-contradiction. He's saying at least one thing is true, that nothing is true. Well, that's self-contradictory. At the same time, he has violated the law of non-contradiction by stating that there is no truth while making what he believes is a true statement. And you'll see how important this is. And just in communication, there are three bases for every worldview. The first one is that there actually is something that's real. Even if you say the world, everything is an illusion, you've established that something is real. An illusion is a false perceptive of reality. So, we have to assume that there is a reality. Second thing is, anybody who thinks in any way about that reality assumes the validity of reason by simply thinking. And then both of those things, the fact that there is a reality, and if you think about it, then you're assuming that the validity of reason, both of those depend on the law of non-contradiction to make sense. You can't even make sense out of anything if two things can both be true and false at the same time. What about the question, then, that I alluded to earlier? What if everything is an illusion? When we use words, as I said, to describe something, or to correspond would be a better way to put it, to something that exists, whether it's a concept or if it's something that has matter, that it is material, we're using that law that I talked about earlier, the law of identity, that the word we assign to it is describing something that is real, that is actually there. A is A, B is B, and it can't be A and not A at the same time. So that's called the law of excluded middle. There can't be something in between. And all valid thinking, whether it's about Christianity, science, and we're going to talk about science in the coming programs, history, it doesn't matter if it's physical or metaphysical, all valid thinking rests on these three simple first principles. Now, I concede to you that so-called Eastern logic denies those three principles because they would say this entire world is an illusion. My point is that even though they deny them, they are still inescapable. In the very denial, they are affirming them. To be real, this question, everything's an illusion. We can't find truth, there is no truth, everything's an illusion. To be real is to exist. Let me say that again. I'm not talking about just a person. I'm not talking about, hey, be real, man. I'm saying that to exist is to be real. If something exists, it's real. If something is real, it exists. So reality is. There is some reality. We may not know what it is. We may not perceive what it is, but it exists. I'll give you an example of that. Gravity existed, and I won't say eternally here because there was no gravity, of course, before creation, before the worlds were formed. But gravity existed whether Sir Isaac Newton defined it or not. It wasn't dependent upon him thinking about it or defining it. He just defined what already was there. There was a reality. Stuff has fallen for a long time. So again, reality is independent of our minds. We're trying to discover that. We're trying to pursue truth. We're trying to find out what truth is. But in doing that, this is my big point. Even though this is not a Christian discovery, I think John, the verse that I read you in John 1, that in the beginning were these principles. That's what he's saying. That's what the Greeks called it, the logos, the word, the eternal truths. And he's saying these are inherent. John, the apostle, is saying these things are inherent to the character of God. That's why they work. That's why logic works. And I want to skip just a little bit here, but I want to say this. We talked about what if everything's an illusion, what if there is no reality. See, and what I'm saying to you is that's not possible. Absolute illusion is an impossibility. If nothing, think about what I'm saying, if nothing existed, then the illusion would not exist either. Does that make sense? There has to be a reality, something that exists. If absolute illusion were true, then the illusion itself would be reality. So what I'm saying is it's an illusion. The real illusion is to believe that reality is an illusion, that there is no absolute truth. Let me read you something. That might be the best way to approach this, okay? C.S. Lewis is my hero. By the way, if you haven't seen The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, go see it. It's tremendous. C.S. Lewis, of course, wrote those, you might call them fairy tales. They're allegories, really, but he was a great philosopher, great English teacher at Oxford. Let me read you what he wrote about what we're talking about. He says, a theory which explained everything else in the whole universe, but which made it impossible to believe that our thinking was valid, would be utterly out of court. For that theory would itself have been reached by thinking. Now, you need to think about what he's saying here. A theory which explained everything else in the whole universe, in other words, a theory that all is an illusion, it self-destructs because it's making that, it's saying thinking is not valid, but it had to think to make the theory. For that theory would itself have been reached by thinking, and if thinking is not valid, that theory would, of course, be itself demolished. It would have destroyed its own credentials. You hear a lot in philosophical circles about things that are self-defeating or self-destructing, and this certainly is one of them. It would be an argument which proved that no argument was sound, a proof that there are no such things as proofs, which is nonsense. So that's the point that I'm making here, and hopefully I'm going to convince you that these things are inherent and true. They're the common ground that we have to reason with, and we would do this somewhat by nature. We would just naturally talk this way, even if you have a Christian and a non-Christian. They would talk this way. They would assume the law of non-contradiction. If I say Jesus is God and they say no, he's not, they prove the law of non-contradiction. If I say God exists and they say I don't think God exists, we're using the law of non-contradiction. Now let's talk, and we don't really have time to get into this, but so let me kind of make a final statement here. Let me go back to John. What John is saying, and this I think is a wonderful, it's a credential for the Bible. The Bible is very deep. What he's saying is that these truths are real. Aristotle's truths are real, and they are inherent to the character of the God in which we believe. And I hope to show in future programs that Christianity will be, if you apply these rules of logic, that Christianity will be the last man standing. So keep watching Church for Skeptics. Thanks.